introduce the winery and Luke and Paul themselves.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tim. Very impressed by the socks there in particular. Yeah, so welcome everybody. It's great to have everyone here, and it's particularly great to have the guys from Wirra here. So we've got Luke and Paul, and Wirra Wirra, it's worth mentioning, have been a really, really key part of the Wine Society's Australia portfolio for quite a number of years now, actually. And they've always been able to make really wonderfully, consistently excellent wines year in, year out. So the quality has never been in question, which is absolutely key. But also the relationships that we've actually had with the people at Wirra Wirra have always been very, very special, you know, and it's certainly a unique challenge, kind of maintaining a strong relationship with someone or a company that is based on the other side of the world. But we've done that successfully with Wirra Wirra for many, many years now. So it's really wonderful to be able to welcome the guys to our Zoom tasting. As you will see on the table there's a few wines to kind of run through as well. We've got a few of the new vintages there, such as the Scrubby Shiraz and the ever popular Church Block, amongst a couple of other bits and bobs. Don't worry if you haven't got a glass of any of the same wines at home, because actually the new vintages we've only just had arrive in Stevenage. So if you did manage to get a bottle of them already, I'd actually be asking how you did that. But if you have a glass of anything that you want to kind of share your tasting notes of, your feedback of, then do comment. Yeah, I'll hand over to Luke and Paul. So guys, thank you very, very much for joining us. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Freddie. So just to be clear, I'm Luke and this is Paul. And thanks very much, Tim, as well. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and thank you for taking time out of your day, which is no doubt very busy to be here. As Freddie touched on, the relationship between Wirra Wirra and the Wine Society goes back a long way. We did the rounds last week, sort of asking if anyone could actually pinpoint when it started, and it seems like it's been going on for so long that no one can remember a time when there wasn't a relationship. So, we're very pleased to join you today. We will talk a little bit about the history of the winery, and then we'll go into a little bit about our approach before we talk about the sort of two regions that we source from. So we're very lucky to be in a fantastic part of the world that's ideal for growing quite a few great varieties. So I will kick off though by just talking a little bit about how Wirra Wirra came to be. What you can see on your screen is a quote by Richard Gregory Trott. So I'll touch on who Trotty was in a minute, but this mantra is written on it's carved out of a giant piece of slate to the entrance of the winery. So it's something that we see every day, and it's something that we really take to heart, and something that we live out, particularly the bit about it all being fun. And you think being in a winery and in the wine industry every day was fun. I'll tell you, it does have its moments, doesn't it, Smithy? Particularly during vintage, but there is a real spirit of fun that has been at Wirra Wirra since the very beginning, and is very much a part of every day here. I'll just go, if we can go to the next slide, Tim, we'll just give you a bit of an idea of why Wirra Wirra has always had this sense of fun. And when I say always, Wirra Wirra was founded in 1894. So the gentleman that's on the second from the left on the front row is Robert Strangways Wigley. He's the man in which our RSW flagship Shiraz is named after. He's quite a colourful character. He played 3 first-class matches for South Australia in cricket at the Adelaide Oval, and was part of a quite well-to-do, quite well-known family in Adelaide. He got into a little bit of strife when he stole a horse-drawn pie cart and took it for a bit of a joyride through the streets of Adelaide. And I think that was on the end of a long list of shenanigans that he got up to in his youth. His punishment from this family was to send him to McLaren Vale, get him out of the city, out of the big smoke, and send him down our way. And his family actually bought him some land on which he planted grapes and built Wirra Wirra. So in the late 1800s, he built part of the winery which we're in today was built by Robert Strangways Wigley. I think it was the best thing that happened to him, because I think he was a very enthusiastic guy who had a lot of energy from all accounts, and having a project like Wirra Wirra allowed him to really focus on something. And he built quite a magnificent winery. And in its time, had a fantastic reputation for quality. He passed away in 1926. And with he was never married, so had no children to pass it on to. And unfortunately, it did survive for another 10 years. But in 1936, the doors were shut, and it was a bit of a tragedy that the winery was left to ruin. And it took Richard Gregory Trott. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see a photo of Richard Gregory Trott, who everyone kindly refers to as Trotty or Trott. And when he stumbled across this land, he was a mixed farmer, so he had some almonds, a big chook farm, and he also had grapes. And he came across what was nothing but ruins. It was a couple of stone walls and an old slate fermenter. And he had a dream, and that dream was to rebuild Wirra Wirra to its former glory. So we've got some great footage in our archives of this place being built, and it's quite classic footage of the times before Oc Health and Safety were even real words. There's a bunch of guys, very fit looking, very skinny looking men with fantastic tans and extremely short shorts, rebuilding Wirra Wirra from the ground up, walking around the top level in their thongs or their flip-flops, carrying bricks and laying bricks. So the first vintage of Wirra Wirra here was actually what Trotty referred to as the vintage under the stars, because there just literally wasn't. It sounds romantic, but it was basically a winery without a roof. But Trotty did, true to his word, did rebuild this place with his cousin. And he spent the next sort of 3 decades rebuilding it to what it is today. So unfortunately, he passed away in 2005, but his family are still staying on as part owners of Wirra Wirra. But he very much set up an environment here, which was what we discussed at the top, which was all about fun. So he really lived that. He was in a very eccentric character, not in a look at me kind of show off way, but he just had his own way of doing things. So a number of our wines, which we'll share some stories when we go through the tasting, but are named after him and the way that he lived his life, such as Hiding Champion and The Lost Watch. But he's very well respected. He was pivotal in protecting McLaren Vale from urban sprawl, because we are quite close to the city of Adelaide. And he was pivotal in protecting McLaren Vale as an agricultural area and protecting it as a wine growing area. So it is now protected by law, which is brilliant. And Trotty had a great deal to do with that. He also made the first vintage of Church Block, which is pretty much the foundation stone for what Wirra Wirra is. So today, if we flip to the next slide, you'll see what Wirra Wirra looks like today, which is very much a gem of McLaren Vale. We're one of the sort of more significant wineries in this region. We've got a thriving cafe restaurant on site. We've got a fantastic cellar door and a fantastic cellar door team. We make all of our wine here, where the cellar door and restaurant are attached to the winery, and it's a sort of brilliant place to get to come to work every day, I must admit. We're very much in the heart of McLaren Vale, and we still very much value being part of the community. So every year we host a number of events, but the big one being the bell ringing ceremony, which is a ceremony which rings in the new vintage every year. So just before vintage kicks off, all of the winemakers from the region gather at Wirra Wirra for a glass of wine and something to eat, and a chance to ring the bell, which you can see in the top left-hand corner. That's 3/4 ton Angelus bell, which we resurrected from a church, and that gets rung every year. It also gets rung by significant visitors, so I'm not sure if you had a chance to do that, Tim, when you were here, but it's just a bit of fun that is really unique to Wirra Wirra. If we go to the next slide, I'll hand over to Paul to talk a little bit about our wines, but also the 2 regions that we source from.
Great, thanks, Luke. So the winery is in McLaren Vale, so often the region where it's described as the place where the vines meet the sea, and it's one of South Australia's oldest wine regions. So the first vineyards were planted in 1838. It's nestled between the Mount Lofty Ranges, which make up part of the Adelaide Hills. So the hills border us to the north and the east, and then we have 32 kilometres of coastline on the west. Really beautiful, pristine beaches. Great if you enjoy catching squid, or our local delicacies, King George whiting. So it is true, we probably do have some great white sharks out there. Very few sightings, but I'm quite practical and take it seriously. So I always send the kids out for a swim first, just to clear the decks. But
don't forget the other major attraction, Smithy. We also have Australia's first nudist beach just down the road. So
called Maslin's. Really interesting geology, so worth a visit. In terms of our climate, it's Mediterranean, so we receive most of our rainfall during the winter, and then just modest amounts sort of later in the growing season. And very importantly, vintage is often quite dry. We have a very low humidity, and we get these beautiful afternoon sea breezes. And throughout the warm part of the year, we're getting to December, January, February, really hitting summer. The days certainly get warm, but these cooling sea breezes and the gully winds that we get through the hills, it just really tempers the temperature, and it allows us to produce wines that have lovely power and weight to them, but there's still this lovely freshness and fragrance and style at the same time. So it's an incredibly sustainable region. It's considered the most sustainable region in Australia, and certainly our Mediterranean climate means disease pressure is very low, and our own company vineyards are biodynamically farmed and certified, and it's a very natural place for this to occur. McLaren Vale has the highest number of organic and biodynamic producers in the country, so it's something that as a region we're really proud of, and we take sustainability incredibly seriously. So that's the McLaren Vale, and really for us, McLaren Vale, it's the heart of where our red wines come from. And so the 3 core varieties we play with are Cabernet Sauvignon, Shiraz, and also Grenache. In terms of our, Freddie, are you jumping in there? No.
I can jump in, but I didn't know if there's. I thought you guys were getting on incredibly well. I was chuckling away to myself about the nudist beach and wondering whether you guys have considered nudist wine tastings off the back of the success of that. But I thought we'd maybe come on to that later.
No, the social distancing will stop that at the moment.
Good point. Good point.
So I'll just fix maybe to the next slide, which just gives a view of McLaren Vale quite nicely. So you see, this is a view of McLaren Vale looking south. So that hill line you see is the Mount Lofty Ranges, which Paul referred to, and you can see the ocean out to the right there, which is the Gulf of St. Vincent. So it's a very beautiful part of the world. That mountain range actually joins, it forms the Adelaide Hills and runs all the way to the southern part of the Barossa.
Yeah.
So they're not, where we are is borders the Adelaide Hills, and the Adelaide Hills borders the Barossa. So it's all quite a reasonably tight area. If you go to the next slide, we've just got a few of the stats about McLaren Vale. So in terms of elevation, obviously it starts at sea level, being on the coast, and goes to 350 metres in the sort of foothills of the Mount Lofty ranges. So it is quite a diverse area for growing grapes. So depending on where we source from, even within a variety such as Shiraz, we can get a very elegant, almost cool climate expression of Shiraz from McLaren Vale. And if you go down to sort of the more low-lying areas, you can get the real, probably rich, dense style of Shiraz, which people expect from McLaren Vale. There is a lot of different microclimates and geology to be found here. It was a glacial deposit, so over millions of years, it was once a giant mountain range has come into McLaren Vale. So we, over the last probably 15 years, have done a lot of work to understand what lies below that initial surface and the impact that has on our wines, to the point that we have mapped the whole underlying geology of the region, which was a bit of a light bulb moment for a lot of winemakers, wasn't it, as to why the fruit from one vineyard tastes so different to one that's 50 metres down the road. Once they took a whole lot of core samples and worked out what the underlying geology was.
So we've sort of, it's been, McLaren Vale at a broader level is broken down into 19 different districts, and we have the oldest geology in the world. So we have some of the oldest rock that's up to 800 million years old. So when Australia was part of the supercontinent Gondwana land. So, we're certainly playing with really old geology here. And there's always a lot of talk about soils and geology. A geologist will say that the soil's there to hold the vine up, and it's I've also heard a geologist say the soil is the dandruff of the earth. But I think really importantly, the geology, the bedrock underneath, it's all the minerals and nutrients that come out, which ultimately become a part of the soil that have a very real influence. And so we play with, we take Shiraz from a number of the different districts, and just by their individual nature, even sort of handling them in a similar way, they have their absolute distinct personality, and we really love that, and we love the diversity that still this quite small region provides us.
One of the beauties of Wirra Wirra is very much a medium-sized winery in the scale of things. So with the amount that we crush every year, there are wineries in Australia that would do what we do in a whole vintage. They would crush in half a day of their vintage. But then, to some other smaller producers, the Wirra Wirra looks huge. But the beauty of being the size that we are is that I think we're big enough to have some of the technology that allows us to make very consistent wines every year. But we're still small enough that we can treat our parcels as individual parcels. So when Paul says that we source from a lot of different areas of the region, we keep all of those parcels separate through fermentation and only combine them when it comes to blending time, which gives Paul and our viticulturists a chance to really follow each vineyard closely and work really closely with growers on targeting certain wines, targeting certain quality levels, and really understanding the region more intimately. So it's a lot of work for Smithy and the team to keep all those parcels separate right through to barrel, but it is a really integral part of making such consistent wines every year, but also maximising what we can from each vineyard. Time to taste some wine, I think, Smithy.
Okay, great. So starting with our Scrubby Shiraz. So the name Scrubby Shiraz comes from the vineyard which is in front of the winery, and Trotty, our lovely eccentric owner, he planted this vineyard back in the sort of late 60s, and the ground was completely flat and didn't have any scrub or vegetation on it whatsoever. So he thought a very logical name was Scrubby Shiraz. It was none of that. It sort of very much captured his quirky humour. But this is Shiraz, and we go to a number of vineyards throughout the region. We're looking at vineyards that are sort of between 10 and 20 years old. So they're not old. They often provide us with, good crops. But this wine, we just want it to be great, easy drinking style. So when the fruit's picked, it's crushed into our static sort of 10 and 20 tonne fermenters. And over 24 hours, the juice will be pumped over the top and splashed, irrigated from the top. And the ferments will go for about 6 to 7 days. And before the tannins really start to firm, we then press. So it's quite gentle handling. And then we'll spend up to 12 months in just older barrels. There's some French, some American, but the oak's not really playing a huge part in this wine. For me, it's really all about this bright sort of juicy, there's raspberries and plummy fruit. It's rich and juicy and luscious, but quite fine tannins. So it's not a big, heavy style Shiraz, but it's just fabulous drinking. So that's the Scrubby Shiraz.
Yeah, so the beauty of, as Paul said, the Scrubby Shiraz is that it doesn't pretend to be a $100 bottle of wine. And the decision to not put a whole lot of oak, mature a whole lot of it in oak, really does allow that fruit. So it is super bright, and we've done a number of tastings with this versus, not versus, but in its bracket, and it just really stands out because of that beautiful, lush, vibrant fruit. So, and very aromatic, isn't it? Like it's got a real heady aroma to it. So really beautiful wine. Church Block.
So moving on to Church Block. Church Block is certainly one of the most loved red wines in Australia. As Luke mentioned earlier, the first vintage was 1972, and it's a wine that people really get behind, and it means everything to our business, so it's taken incredibly seriously. It's quite a unique blend. It's Cabernet Shiraz Merlot, and it's always Cabernet led, but we take Cabernet blocks, Shiraz blocks, Merlot blocks from, once again, we're going through the spread of the region, and they're all crushed and fermented and aged separately in barrel. And I'll spend about 3 weeks blending this wine, and it always starts with Cabernet. And the 2018 vintage, it was 51% Cabernet, so Cabernet led. And for me, Cabernet really gives Church Block the structure and the framework. It's that red and black currant fruit. It gives a lovely fragrance to the wine as well, but it's that sort of skeleton, it's the framework, and really sets the wine up. The Shiraz that is the second leading varietal, that's sort of the rich plum. It's like the meat that goes around the bones of the Cabernet. And the Merlot, it's the lowest volume by percentage. And in my early days at Wirra, I questioned whether it sort of added value to the blend. So I spent lots of time, and we often find this point where it can be 9, 10, 11%, where it just adds this lovely fleshiness to the mid palate and somehow brings the Cabernet and Shiraz together. So it's a wine that it's about great balance, and it's a wine that people are incredibly loyal to. So we get people coming down every year. It's a pilgrimage to our cellar door to buy the new release, and they'll buy their 2 cases, and they have to try the new release at cellar door, and they'll drink perhaps the first case in that first year, and then they'll put the balance down for 10 years or longer. And it's got this great history of showing that it ages for 10 and 15 years and longer. So Church Block, we're really proud of it. It's a wine that I can travel around the country. And if people know I'm from Wirra Wirra, they come and start talking to me about Church Block and when they had it 10, 15, 20 years ago. And you really love that, because often when you have to go and talk about your wines, you're the one up the front saying the words, whereas Church Block gets everyone else talking. So you feel proud to be part of it.
Paul, just to jump in there, when I was there in 2017, you were running a competition for customers to write in and tell their stories of Church Block over the years. So perhaps later, I won't put you right on the spot, but you might be able to share one or two of the winning entries, because I'm sure there are some amazing stories.
Yeah, one of the unique things about Church Block is that there's an incredible amount of trust in this wine, and it's also been a favourite of other people in the wine industry. So I think it's one of the rare wines in Australia that you can get, in on premise. You can get it in retail as well. So it's one of the few wines that is kind of quite widely available there, but it's often, for people that are in the wine industry, if they see it on a wine list, they'll go to it because they know it's going to be good and be interesting too, being the blend that it is. But yeah, with that campaign, Tim, was really quite interesting. We got a lot of fantastic entries of people. And it was really heartwarming to see what it's meant to people at different points in their life. And the sort of intimacy of some of the stories that got shared was quite amazing. There was one couple that shared their story about how they'd been trying to have children for a number of years, and they'd given up on IVF, and the night they gave up on IVF, they shared a bottle of Church Block, and ended up having... They
shared two bottles,
and they ended up having twins. So that was sort of one of the winning entries that we had to acknowledge. So and twin boys. So they were. I think they were happy with that. Whether they're still happy with that, I don't know. But that was sort of one of the stories that got told. RSW.
Great. So moving on to the third red in our lineup, our flagship Shiraz called RSW. It's the initials of Robert Strangways Wigley, who started Wirra Wirra back in 1894. It's really fitting his name, his initials go on this wine. It is the best of what we make of this variety every year. And to achieve that, we go to our oldest vineyards, our best vineyards, and they're all on, there's 5 vineyards that went into it, 5 blocks, and they are different soils, different geologies, and, they all look incredibly different, and we love that. So they're made as single vineyard wines and all treated incredibly differently. They're like people, different things will work for them. And we're really just trying to get the best out of their characters. So the fruit's crushed into small 2-ton open fermenters with a lot of hand plunging and some gentle pump over. So very traditional winemaking, and the fruit will spend about 7 to 10 days on skins at the end of ferment, and after basket pressing, the wine then goes into French oak, and will spend about 18 months, and about a third of it is new oak and quite low char. When I look at this wine, for me, great older vine, McLaren Vale Shiraz, then it's not always the loudest by nature, and we don't want it to be. We have blocks that come in from an area called Blewett Springs, which are ancient sand dunes, and these tend to produce a style of Shiraz with lots of red fruits, and there's some fragrance. It's got lovely fine tannins, lovely acid levels, and incredibly stylish. And then we have some blocks next to the winery, which are sort of deeper, heavier soils, and they tend to produce this deeper, darker, more brooding Shiraz, and you start to see more of the chocolate and the tarry notes and the leather coming through. And ultimately, we blend them and bring them together, and so you get this lovely concentration, and they're low yielding vineyards, so would expect that, but it's really all these different colours and layers that these wines provide. And these old vineyards, they really talk about where they're from, the strip of dirt that they grow on, the growing season they've been through, and really importantly, they come together and there's this lovely harmony, but there's this balance between power with style and grace. It's not easy to pull that off, but these lovely old blocks, they're like older people. They have these great stories, and you just take the time to listen. And if you sit down and have this over a meal, you'll get new aromas and flavors and textures throughout that process. And I think the other really exciting thing is, we could sit down in 20 years together and taste this wine, and we would say, what a delightful wine. So that's what RSW provides us.
Yeah, it's certainly not that balance. And I mean, it's a McLaren Vale Shiraz, so it's dense and it's intense, but it's not. There's still an absolute elegance to it, isn't it? And that's that Blue Springs fruit coming through. But yeah, it is a stunner. And I must say that the in the flagship range we have a Grenache also and a Cabernet, and they all have that same quality whereby there is a real elegance to them, and they're not the biggest, richest wines that we make in our portfolio, but they are the ones that have the balance and longevity to put in the cellar for a long time.
I think certainly Wirra Wirra, forever, they've never made the biggest, boldest alcoholic wines. There hasn't been a lot of use of American oak, and very sensible levels of new oak, just with the top end wines. And I think for all of us here, great wine is about balance, and if you get the balance of great fresh fruit character, but the right concentration and the layers, what it can then really talk about, it talks about a region, but it can talk about a vineyard and geology and where it's from. And that's really exciting if you can hope to get to that point.
Cool. We're kind of going to go in reverse order and start talking about some white wines. Smithy, do you want to start by talking about the Wine Society Chardonnay?
Yeah, sure. So Wine Society Chardonnay, so this is a wine that I've been at Wirra for 12 years now. So I was 20 when I started, but we've been making it certainly for, I think for 15 years or so. And so this wine, we take fruit from, it's the Adelaide GI. So there was a period where the Chardonnay was from McLaren Vale, but for quality reasons, we took it outside of McLaren Vale. So we wanted to go to cooler districts. So we're talking about the Adelaide Hills. We take a small parcel of fruit from an area called Nankita, which is closer to Currency Creek. But importantly, in this cooler climate, it just allows for greater varietal purity with Chardonnay. With the wine, when the fruit's picked, it's pressed, and the majority of it is fermented in a stainless steel tank to keep it really fresh and bright and keep that purity of fruit. About 10% is run down to barrel and we'll go through fermentation in barrel, and we'll spend 3 months, but it's largely older French oak. And, with this wine, when it comes together, it is all about this sort of lovely sort of primary fruit, and I'll see some apple and sort of grapefruit character, some fresh melon, and it's in the mouth. It's got this sort of lovely depth of stone fruit and this pithy texture to it, but just a very subtle sort of creaminess and just a hint of cedar, which sometimes I just get a nuance and I think I can see it. Sometimes I won't, but the small amount of barrel fermentation Chardonnay it really just adds a little dimension. So it's just chasing that sort of little bit of mouthfeel and texture to add a little bit of interest to the wine. So A really delicious wine. It's very Moorish. So, you know, the 19's drinking incredibly well. The 20, which has been bottled and will follow, you know, very much from the same vineyards, but you'll just, once again, being the younger wine, there'll be, you know, lovely vibrancy to the aromatics and that lovely sort of fresh, nervy, edgy freshness.
Cool. If we can just flick to the Adelaide Hills slides, that'd be great. So as we sort of touched on earlier, we do source fruit from 2 regions. So McLaren Vale is all of our reds from McLaren Vale, and all of our white wines are sourced from the Adelaide Hills. So the Adelaide Hills is a very long region, which, as I said before, stretches from McLaren Vale through to the Barossa. It's about 70 kilometres north to south, and it's quite a narrow region, but a huge variance in elevation. So it gets a huge variance in rainfall as well. So Adelaide Hills is very much about picking the right areas. There are 2 recognised sub-regions of the hills, being Piccadilly Valley and Lenswood, that are identified just because of their temperature being a bit colder, and also the amount of rainfall that they get. Compared to the McLaren Vale, it's a much younger region. It was really only established in the late 70s and early 80s, and it took a while to sort of really get going. I mean, that was in the era when, you know, Australian wine was very much, you know, about being, you know, bigger, bolder style. So understanding a cool climate region took a little bit longer. But now there's some really sought after prime vineyard locations in the Adelaide Hills because of its temperature and rainfall as well. Very much dominated by white varieties, particularly Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc. Chardonnay for both table wines and sparkling wine, and Pinot Noir is the sort of emerging red variety of the region. But it's not just grape varieties. There's apples, pears, cherries, strawberries, a lot of mixed farming in the Adelaide Hills. And a very beautiful, beautiful part of the world. Do you want to talk a little about the 12th Man?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, we strategically take our white grapes from the Adelaide Hills, and it is very much about the elevation. So, you know, we're looking at sort of vineyards that are above 580 metres above sea level. And so we make a Riesling, Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay from the Adelaide Hills, and very much in this cooler climate. It's all about really precise varietal expression, which McLaren Vale gets right with Shiraz, Cabernet and Grenache, but we really leave the whites to the cooler climate. What's interesting with the Adelaide Hills, there's lots of English trees, and a lot of the English settlers, you know, certainly during summer, the plains of Adelaide would get quite hot, and so they many of them had their country houses up in the Adelaide Hills, and it's really from Adelaide to really get into the heart of the Adelaide Hills. It's only 10 kilometres, and Adelaide's quite flat, but it goes up very quickly going into the hills, and you can see, you know, literally you're driving in your car, and within 10 or 12 minutes you can get a 10-degree temperature drop. So it's very significant. But our 12th Man Chardonnay, this is an incredibly fun wine to make. You know, we make the Riesling and the Sauvignon Blanc and the Wine Society Chardonnay. That's very much largely the, you know, not touch it, chasing this lovely sort of purity of fruit. Whereas with the 12th Man, we're really looking for a very complex and layered Chardonnay. It's called 12th Man. Trotty was a cricketing tragic, like Robert Strangway's Wiggly. And Trotty would often go missing. And if he was missing for more than 2 days, it normally meant there was a very good cricket game on somewhere. He built a house across the road from the winery, and the entrance hallway is the dimensions of a cricket pitch. So there were some wonderful lunches and dinners with a bit of indoor cricket action afterwards. But this Chardonnay is from 2 vineyards in the Adelaide Hills. There's a vineyard in Lobethor and the second vineyard's in Lenswood. So there are, as Luke mentioned, there's 2 GIs. There's the Piccadilly Valley and Lenswood, so the 2 coldest, and Lobethal sits just below Lenswood in terms of temperature, so still very cool. And the fruit's handpicked. We play with 4 blocks, but there's 3 different clones, and the fruit comes to the winery and it's whole bunch pressed. So, you know, a lot of the white we de-stem and crush to get the juice off the skins very quickly. With this process of whole bunch pressing, it's a long drawn out pressing cycle, but we allow the juice to pick up a little bit of oxygen. So it starts to brown. It can make you feel quite nervous seeing this browning action, but through that oxidation, it really adds to the complexity of the juice and ultimately the wine. And what's interesting, that the brown compounds that basically scavenge the phenolics that just scavenge the oxygen from the air, so they turn brown. But at the end of fermentation, when the yeast drop out, all the colour drops out and you get this gorgeous colour. So you hold your nerve through that. But as soon as the juice is pressed, it's run down to barrel and 100% French and largely puncheon, so the 500 litre barrels. But we don't add any yeast, and after about 5 to 6 days, the wild yeast will ferment the wine, and the ferments will last between 3 and 4 weeks. And towards the end of fermentation, we stir the yeast daily. It resuspends, and they're starting to drop out, and we want to resuspend them, just reinvigorate them and make sure that they chew up all that sugar and it goes clean and dry the first time. And after fermentation, the wine will spend a total of 9 months in barrel, and throughout the period, we're often stirring every second week, where we stir the dead yeast, or batonnage as it's often called around the world, and just to resuspend the yeast. They're dead at this stage and they start to break down, but it just gives them some lovely yeasty, creamy character. A third of it's new oak, and so that forms a part of this wine. And really importantly, when it comes together, when I see lovely cool climate Adelaide Hills Chardonnay, I'm thinking I see white peach and nectarine and citrus fruit. But aromatically with this wine, there's that lovely fruit, but there's also some cedary oak, there's some brioche, there's some of the barrels will go through a partial malo, which you get some sort of buttery, creamy character from, and sort of almost roasted nuts. And in the mouth, there's this lovely concentration of stone fruits, but once again, sort of peach and nectarine fruits, but it's laid by this lovely charry oak. There's a creaminess, but still this lovely freshness. So it's layered, but it just has all these other components to it. So you're always chasing the balance, because you've got the balance of great fruit, oak, malo character, lees character, and so there's lots of levers, and I really look forward to the challenge of making this wine every year.
Brilliant stuff, guys. Thank you very much. That was really, really interesting and lovely to get a bit of background, and great to go through those wines. Somebody commented along the way about the church block in particular and how it punches above its weight, which I think is completely true, and I think actually is true for all of the wines that you've got lined up there. It's one of the real, one of the things that I think Wirra Wirra does so well is make wines that just punch above their weight. And when we talk about, you know, wine which is good value, that often suggests, you know, we're talking entry level stuff, but actually Wirra Wirra, I think across the board, the wines are great value, but, you know, they're sort of like an entry into fine wine, some of these wines, you know, and I think Church Blocks in particular sits in a really, really nice place with that regard. It's accessible fine wine that punches well above its weight. So it's no wonder that it's become a favorite for so many people. I've actually got the Dead Ringer, which I found a nice old bottle of 2013 Dead Ringer, and it's absolutely delicious. I'm so pleased to have an excuse to open this on a Thursday lunchtime. We're going to take some questions from people because there's quite a few that have come in. But I was going to kick off with one, actually, if that's all right. You guys obviously work, as you've just said, in McLaren Vale and in Adelaide Hills as well. But what I'd like to know is that if Wirra Wirra were to start working in another region of Australia, anywhere in Australia, where would you choose and why?
Oh, look, if
You go first, Smithy.
Yeah.
I have different ideas about this.
if I could play with some fruit, Tasmania, I think's a fabulous little zone. It, with some of the Chardonnay, some of the Pinot that they're making, I think is really exciting. So that's an area that I go down there and you get a sort of rush of blood and you think, oh, come on, Wirra, let's buy a vineyard down here, but haven't quite got it over the line yet.
That's perfect. That makes sense. No, it seems like a really, really exciting part of Australia currently. So Tim's got some questions lined up from folks. So Tim, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Freddy. So we're going to throw to some members to actually ask their questions directly. So I think we've got Leah lined up to start with one on climate change for you guys.
Hi.
Hi, Leah.
Hi. This is quite unusual for me. So normally with these questions, I have to get Tim to ask because my kids are here, but they've gone back to school now, which is great, and it's really quiet. So I feel really lucky to ask this question myself. So I just want to ask, given your diverse topography and the area which your vineyards are in, have you started to see any climatic or weather differences with climate change? And if so, how do you think you'll combat that in terms of, maybe replanting or looking at higher elevations or, yeah.
Great question, Leah. You certainly, I've, been in the industry for quite a few years now, and, you definitely, because farming's our life, the weather, the seasons, and you remember them all so vividly, but they sort of have a little mark on you, and you they're a part of you for the rest of your life. And our vintages have really changed. Going back to prior to 2007, a lot of our vintages were starting 4 to 5 weeks later than they are now. And you can imagine, we're often sort of starting vintage in sort of mid to late February, and you go back sort of 15 years ago and it was pushing really into late March, and a lot of it was happening in April, and that's very much, you're well into autumn, the days are cooling down, and so, the fruit's coming in and ripening slower, and so our vintages are a lot more compressed. They're coming in, the weather tends to be warmer, and so they're not quite as cruisy as they used to be, and so you have to be a lot quicker on your feet. And so I think what it does, though, it really, we used to be able to get away with a long time ago being a bit more practical and agricultural, but now you have to be strategic, and things ripen faster. So you're in the vineyard daily just watching and then grabbing things at exactly the time they need to come off, and you don't want to miss them by 2 or 3 days, whereas 15 years ago, you could pick them a week later, 10 days later, you'd be fine. So it certainly changed the flow of our vintages. In terms of varieties and plantings, I think climatically, Shiraz does very well right through McLaren Vale, as Grenache does. With Cabernet, which is a really important variety, almost half of Church Block, what we've found that we used to take Cabernet from the lower areas closer to the sea, which are quite early ripening, and those blocks produce wines that have great weight, but if we really want to chase the lovely fragrance and some of the style, then we are taking more and more Cabernet sort of from the more elevated vineyards that are, you know, closer to bordering the Adelaide Hills. And so that's, you know, that's a significant change, and that by going to different parts of the region, you know, it can help manage the fruit coming through our winery, the timing of it. It spreads the timing, but also can help drive a certain style and elegance that we want to get. And, you know, for me with vineyards, you know, those warmer sites, I tend to, you know, Shiraz, Grenache, you know, they love that Mediterranean climate. If you're chasing fragrant Cabernet with great style, you know, go to the cooler parts of McLaren Vale. So, you know, that's, you know, for the core varieties that we're using. And there certainly are a lot of people pulling out Cabernet and changing it over. We find with Cabernet in McLaren Vale, there's Utica or dead arms. So they can get to 50, 60, 70 years old and they become very unproductive. Whereas Grenache Shiraz, you really don't have those problems. So, you know, you can get 100-year-old Grenache vines that are still, you know, putting out a good crop. So a lot of those older Cabernet blocks are now being turned over to Grenache and Shiraz, and from those warmer parts of the district. I think that makes perfect sense.
Just on that too, I mean, one of the reasons that sustainability has been such a focus in McLaren Vale for a while now is, and there are a lot more qualified people to talk about this than me, but our viticulturist always talks about building resilience in the vineyard, and biodynamic and organic viticulture is a lot about doing that naturally. So a lot of that has been building resilience in the vineyard so they can cope with varying conditions. So, but it's amazing what, when McLaren Vale was first planted in the mid 1800s, they planted the right varieties for the right region, and Shiraz and Grenache, which have been planted since the very beginning, are still very very suitable for the climate that we've got today. So we're very lucky that we're not one of the varieties that has a very narrow band in which it can grow. Being particularly in McLaren Vale and with the varieties we work with, they are set up to be able to deal with that change as it comes. But certainly something that we're aware of, absolutely.
Wonderful response, guys. Thanks for that. Leo also mentioned weather patterns there, and we've had another question from Jackie Scott about the bushfires, and obviously Adelaide Hills this year in particular were badly decimated by the fires. How are your vineyards up there?
Yeah, so we were affected in the Adelaide Hills. So we had one of our Riesling blocks that was burnt, and we also, for the 12th Man Chardonnay, we lost one of the blocks that goes into that. So that was significant. I mean, they're quite small volumes for us, but we were still lucky to produce lovely wines of Riesling, Chardonnay, and Sauvignon Blanc, from the 20 vintage. And the problem with smoke taint, you might have a vineyard that was 5 kilometres from where the heat of the fire was. It really depended on where the smoke finished and if it sat around for any length of time. So we were doing a lot of testing of vineyards prior to picking, and it became very clear vineyards that were impacted or not. So we were lucky. It was certainly terrible for a number of our for a number of growers throughout the Adelaide Hills, but Wirra got through fairly well. There are also fires on Kangaroo Island, which by distance really isn't that far, but the winds were very favourable, so McLaren Vale didn't have any smoke effect at all. So,
and yeah, we're very lucky that in McLaren Vale it wasn't. We didn't have any fires and really no smoke, but yeah, certainly parts of the Adelaide Hills were really affected. But one of the great things that the Australian Wine Research Institute did was make testing available, and they responded really quickly to ensure that any wine that hits the market had access to testing, and making sure that nothing hits the market with any risk of smoke taint.
it's quite interesting because in 2015 there was a fire in the Adelaide Hills, and that was really our first exposure to fruit potentially being compromised. It's often very clear cut. We run this test where you go through and you pick grapes before they're harvested, and you just crush them in a bucket and get the ferment going over 2 or 3 days, just in a bucket, and you take the lid off, and those that are significantly impacted, it smells like an ashtray. You can't escape it. So, if smoke affected grapes turned up to your winery, you can't hide it.
Wonderful. Thanks guys. We've running out of time, but just a couple of quick questions. Mike Bullitt, I believe, has one on biodynamics, which you've been mentioning there about building resilience. So Mike, are you able to ask?
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much. Very interesting, both of you. Really enjoyed it. Luke, earlier on, you said that you run biodynamic vineyards, and then a little later on, you said that you use the implication was that through modern technology, you were able to get consistent wines. Now, the first one implies no intervention or very little. The second one implies perhaps a little bit more. And I may have missed something, or maybe it's just the way you blend the wines, which was what you're referring to. I would just be interested in how you reconcile these two.
No, so my reference in terms of having access to technology to make consistent wines is more about in the winery. So, and a lot of that comes down to temperature control. And being able to monitor ferments and at the right temperatures to make consistent wines. So I wouldn't even call it intervention. It's just about, in the winery, it's more quality control than it is probably intervention. So being able to monitor everything really closely and running your ferments at the right temperatures so they last the right amount of time to get the right levels of extraction. So in terms of having the right tools, that's what I meant in that answer. I mean, here it's probably in terms of intervention in the winery, it's quite hands off really. Like it's all open, a lot of small open fermenters. So I wouldn't say that it's highly interventionist in the winery, and certainly in the vineyards, it's very, particularly when it's run biodynamically, there's a lot of observation that happens, but there's very minimal inputs. Is that you want to add to that? Cover it? Does that answer your question? Hopefully.
I think that covers it well, and I think it is that in the vineyard it is very much hands off, and then even what you are doing when you're interventing, it's more about preserving the fruit and preserving the character of the wine, rather than adding anything to it. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Wonderful. So that does bring us just about to a close. So just want to thank both Luke and Paul very much for joining us today. Freddie, do you want to finish on any final comments? You're still on mute there, Freddie.
Sorry, I thought I'd take myself off mute. I just wanted to say a massive thank you, really, to Luke and Paul. It's been really, really good to finally get Wirra Wirra into the Zoom tasting schedule. You guys mentioned about the bell at the winery, and I was very lucky when I was there with you guys last year to be allowed to ring the bell, and that was still a high point in my career. But there's also a massive great catapult, which I haven't yet had a chance to have a go with, so maybe next time. But I assume that that's what you actually use to get less welcome visitors off the property quickly, so it's fair enough. But massive thank you. The wines that we talked about today are now available on the website. I'm not sure if they were showing up previous to this session, but they are now all available online. And so, do kind of get on there and grab yourselves a bottle of those, because they're all looking absolutely superb. So I guess all that's left to do is say a big thank you to the guys in our tastings team. Thank you, Tim, for running this really smoothly. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. And thank you to you guys at Wirra Wirra. It's been absolutely brilliant to see you, and I hope it's not too long before we can actually see each other again in real life, not via a screen. So big cheers to you. I'll pour myself another little dribble because it's absolutely delicious. And big thank you. Cheers.
And can I just say a quick shout out to one of your members, Alan Page, who's the uncle of one of our cellar hands, who I think is listening today. So quick shout out from Nick and the team at Wirra Wirra.
Freddie, someone asked where the bell came from, and it came from the St Ignatius Church in Norwood in Adelaide.
Okay, good spot.
Could you maybe just very quickly, and sorry to drag it on, but very quickly let us know the meaning behind the name of the dead ringer that Freddie's drinking there?
So our flagship Cabernet in Australia is called the Angelus, named after the Angelus bell that sits above the winery. The 2004 wine won Best Cabernet in the World in London at the International Wine Challenge, and Wirra won Red Winemaker of the Year. So that was quite exciting. For the first time, Wirra sold 2 cases into France. Never sold any wine before, but it was based on this award, and it was sold at this into this very good restaurant in Paris. And unfortunately, one of the owners of Chateau Angelus, the famous first growth producer, saw it and wasn't impressed. And Wirra received a letter. Very little was understood, but 250,000 euros in Bordeaux court and cease and desist was quite clear. So they wouldn't allow us to use the name the Angelus in export. So the name of that wine got changed to the Dead Ringer because it is a dead ringer for the Angelus.
Brilliant. Somebody's quite rightly said we could do a whole session on the names of the Wirra wine, so maybe we could do it as a follow-up one day. But brilliant stuff, guys. Well, thank you very, very much indeed. It's been great to see you, and it's been really, really interesting to sit and listen to the presentation, and especially good to be able to have an excuse to drink this lovely stuff. So thank you very much indeed.
Hope you're all holding up well. All the best.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.